Good evening, everybody. Thanks for the introduction. My name is Jan, and yeah, could have been a German name, Jan Beckers, but Jan is a typically Scottish name if you're a woman. I'm from Glasgow, live in Glasgow, work in Glasgow, but originally I grew up in a small place southeast of Glasgow called Belgium. Sorry about that. But since I have the ginger hair, I thought I fit in better with the Scottish people than with the Belgian people. Plus, I like whiskey a lot. Now, first thing, when you enjoy whiskey, you have to keep in mind you're talking spirit. Whiskey is always bottled at a minimum strength of 40% alcohol. All the whiskeys we're going to try tonight are higher in strength. There'll be 48, 51%, and up to cask strength, 54.9%. So it's not like wine. When you nose wine, you swirl your glass around. You can do that with whiskey as well to release the aromas. But with wine, you put your nose in and you inhale. If you do that with whiskey, you kind of burn your nostrils and you don't smell anything after a while. So what you want to do is when you swirl your glass, and you notice we're not having the traditional whiskey tumbler. We've got a nosing glass here, which is wide at the bottom and closes up at the top, so you concentrate the aromas of the whiskey. So you just swirl around your glass and have a little sniff. And join in, please. And we're starting off with a nice light Highland whiskey from Distillery. This is our new range called Old Particular. And we've got a 16-year-old Glenord, fully matured in a refill hogshead, so it's an ex-bourbon cask. Now, another way to sniff your whiskey is you put your hand on the glass, give it a good shake. Try that with wine. See the French, how they react. and what happens is you fill up your glass with alcohol, whiskey vapor, and you'll pick up more of the aromas coming out. Now you're wondering what to do with this. Now you can lick it. We taste a lot of whiskey in the morning, so I don't have to wear aftershave. And I was doing a whiskey tasting in Canada a couple of weeks ago, and there was one lady who said, "Oh, I would wear this as perfume." So I told her husband, "Perfect birthday gift for you. She'll smell nicely, and you can drink her perfume." But another thing you can do is rub your hands together, and the alcohol will evaporate, and you just have all the oils, all the aromas that are in the whiskey that come out. So you make a cup and smell the whiskey. You've got a very nice cereal note here. I get roses and lavender as well. But maybe I shouldn't have used the fragrance soap earlier on. Now we're starting with a light whiskey and we're building up in flavor and character. This is what we call a pre-dinner whiskey, or almost a breakfast dram. When we are in the office, we generally taste the whiskey in the morning because you've got a clear palate and you pick up more flavors and aromas. There's also another reason. My boss, Fred Laing, he comes into the office by car, and he makes it very strict that he will never touch a dram after midday, so he can drive home safely. I, on the other hand, I walk home. So if there's any emergency samples coming in the afternoon that need to be dispatched to certain customers, then I'm always ready to taste a bit more. Although the walk back home generally takes a bit longer because I'm going a bit sideways. Now, when you're tasting whiskey, we kind of have a rule of thumb that for every year the whiskey has been in the cask, you should keep the whiskey 1 second on your palate. So if you get a 10-year-old whiskey, 10 seconds in your mouth before you swallow it. 16-year-old, 16 seconds. That's a tough one doing a whiskey tasting in Russia. When I was doing this talk, they had tried all the whiskeys and they were gone already. The reason why you do that is your palate will adjust while you're tasting the whiskey. It'll slowly reduce in strength as well on your mouth, and you'll pick up more flavors and more characters. Now, this is whiskey coming from one single cask. It's single malt, produced in the Highlands of Scotland, north of Inverness, distillery that still has its own maltings. And Glenort used to be quite popular in Europe as well, but the owners of the distillery have decided that certain brands will only go to certain markets. So now they bottle Glenort in a brand called the Singleton, and the Singleton is available in Europe from Dufton Distillery, but Glenort either goes to the States or to the Far East. I'm not really sure. Now, this is coming from one single cask, and the great thing for me working for an independent bottler is wherever I go, I'll have a new selection of different whiskies to taste. I'm traveling around Germany for 4 days now, and the selection will differ every time. So whenever I taste the whiskies here, it's like revisiting an old friend, because I either have tasted it in the office, and then if I selected a cask, you'll have my little initial next to the tasting note, or it's Fred that selected the cask. But when I'm tasting it here, it'll be my impressions here, because it might be different on a Monday night after a nice dinner compared to a Monday morning before breakfast. You'll pick up different flavors and aromas. Like I said, breakfast dram. Everything is in there to have a breakfast. Got a cereal note to it. There's lots of fruity sweetness coming through, a bit of vanilla. A nice opener for the tasting. Very creamy as well. Very velvety. There's nothing that attacks your palate. You've got that nice sweetness coming through. Now, when you're looking at your different glasses on the table, and we're kind of in a very nice warming settlement here light-wise, but you'll also notice, if you compare whiskey number 1 with whiskey number 3, there's a big color difference between the different whiskies. The reason for that is that we don't color the whiskey. This is the natural color of the whiskey as it comes out of the cask. Again, a lot of whiskey companies, when they have a light whiskey like that, they're a bit worried, because a lot of consumers believe that the darker the whiskey is, the older it is and the better it is. So this is 16 years old in the cask, and it's still this quite light pale color, because the ex-bourbon cask doesn't give much color to your whiskey anymore, because bourbon has already washed a lot of the color out of the wood. So if the whiskey comes out of the cask like this, some companies might be tempted to add a little caramel coloring to the whiskey. They say, oh, it doesn't change anything of the flavor of the whiskey. But we like to be honest, and even if the whiskey is quite pale, we'll just bottle it that way. And we're going to a Speyside distillery called Glenkeith. And as we were just discussing earlier on, that the whiskey industry sometimes has good years when demand is high and production is increased and distilleries are being built or enlarged. And you've got slow years where demand is getting lower and warehouses are full of whiskey and they don't know what to do with it. And some distilleries will be closed, will be demolished, will be mothballed. And Glenkeith is one of these distilleries that has been mothballed for several years, but with the increasing demand, the distillery has been reopened May last year. So it's back in production again. Now you get a bit more spices on the nose here. Again, refill hogshead, so an ex-bourbon cask, but a bit of extra time in the cask and obviously a different distillery. On the palate, I get this kind of nice, fine toffee hit first. Then you get some lovely spices, some milk chocolate coming through. Again, very creamy, but it's getting more and more complex. And something I often forget telling, and I did it again, it's always a good thing to leave a bit of the previous whiskies in the glass, so you can go back to the first, second, and so on. Something else I haven't told you is the addition of water. You've got your pipettes on the table, and they're very handy, because if you want to add a drop of water, you don't add too much in one go. But a lot of people, they've heard, oh, when you drink whiskey at a high strength, when you add water, it reduces the strength, it opens up the whiskey, and you get more subtle aromas and characteristics from the whiskey coming through. And that's true, but it doesn't work for every whiskey. And sometimes if you're lucky, and you're in a warehouse, and you take a sample straight from the cask, and you've got the aroma of the angel's share hanging in the warehouse, try the whiskey, and it's maybe 55% alcohol, cask strength, and you taste it, and it's just round, velvety, very complex. And then you add a drop of water, and the whiskey becomes completely flat. So what you need to know about adding water is that, first of all, it's a personal thing. Some people like to add a lot of water. Some people don't like to add water at all and like the whiskey cask strength. But it also depends from whiskey to whiskey. And sometimes you go to a whiskey event and you pour somebody a dram that they've never tried before, and they go straight for the water. And I always suggest, try it neat first, and then if it's too strong for you personally, then you can add a little touch of water. And now we're going to a real sherry beast here. Fans of sherry matured whiskey? Yes. Yeah? The thing with sherry matured whiskey is that there's a small problem, and that's people are drinking less and less sherry, while sherry matured whiskey is getting more and more popular. So you don't have enough sherry casks to fulfill the demand of Scotch whiskey. So you need to find solutions on how to work your way around that problem. One way that some companies try to use is when they have a sherry cask and they've used it once or twice, so the sherry influence isn't very strong anymore, they'll burn the cask from the inside, scrape off a layer of the wood, and then they fill the cask with sherry again. Now, it only partially works. You don't have the same effect as a proper sherry cask because the whiskey has already taken so much out of the wood. And it's not just what's been in the wood that's important, it's actually the wood itself. And because sherry isn't as aggressive on the wood as, for example, bourbon, you actually leave a lot more flavor in the wood itself than what you would have in a bourbon cask. So even if you kind of refix a sherry cask, it doesn't, the wood doesn't give as much character anymore. But what you can do is kind of specifically build sherry butts for the whiskey industry. So in Spain, there's cooperages, Tonelería, in Spanish, that build casks for the sherry industry, but also are building casks for the whiskey industry, fill them with sherry. The sherry will mature because the demand isn't there. The sherry will be used for something else. They might make it into sherry vinegar sometimes. But it's to make sure that the Scotch whisky industry has enough casks to mature and to obtain this nice dark colored whiskey with a totally different flavor. Some distilleries even bought forests in Spain to make sure that they would have enough oak available for the future as well. So when you're making whiskey, you're not just making it for yourself. Basically, you're making it for the second and third generation coming after you. Now, look at this dark golden amber color. When you nose it, for me, it's kind of beeswax, polished wood, old furniture, walking into an antique shop. But at the same time, you've got this fruitiness coming through, kind of stewed fruits, stewed red fruit. Just lots of dry spices. Now, while an ex-bourbon cask generally gives you kind of fresh, fruity flavors and vanilla and honey, the sherry cask will go for that chocolate, tobacco, nutty, leathery character. Now let's have a little sip, and you'll notice that a sherry matured whiskey will be completely mouth-coating and covers your whole palate.